Have you ever wondered why human evil in its earliest days reached such an unfathomable level that the Creator himself needed to purify the world with the waters of a flood? We have been taught to look into the heart of man, to the stain of original sin that spread like a shadow. But what if that is only part of the story? What if the key to understanding such corruption is not buried in the earth, but hidden in the heavens? There is a celestial secret, a narrative so impactful and solemn that it was considered forbidden, the chronicle of powerful angels who made a fatal choice, a choice whose consequences shaped the destiny of the ancient world and whose echoes, dark and persistent, still resonate in our days, reminding us that not all light that comes from above wishes to guide us to good. This is not a randomly whispered legend, but a lost chapter of our own cosmic journey, a truth that exposes the fragility of the border between the sacred and the profane. Why was this story relegated to the margins, guarded in ancient texts that few dare to read? Perhaps because it reveals an uncomfortable truth that humanity did not stumble into darkness alone. We were seduced, taught, and corrupted by beings who were supposed to protect us. They offered us knowledge we were not ready to receive, a power we could not control. To understand their fall is to understand the true nature of the temptation we face, a seduction that promises divinity but delivers only chaos and destruction. Before the cataclysm, before the world was washed in divine tears, there existed an order of celestial beings of unimaginable splendor. They were known as the Watchers, or the Sentinels. Their abode was the firmament, and from there, their eyes of pure light observed young humanity flourishing on earth. They were not mere spectators. They were guardians of the cosmic order, witnesses to the divine plan unfolding in real time. Their function was noble, a silent ministry of observation, a link between the throne of God and the creation he so loved. They existed in a state of glory and purpose, bathed in the light of the Creator's presence, and their duty was a hymn of loyalty sung through the silent ages. What then could lead such majestic creatures to abandon their exalted position, to trade eternity for temporality, glory for flesh? What desire could be so overwhelming as to make them break a sacred oath made before God himself? This is the question that pulses at the heart of this epic narrative. Their choice was not a momentary impulse, but a decision that tore a rift in the fabric of reality. They saw the beauty of the daughters of men, and this vision became an obsession, a fire that consumed their duty and their sanctity. Their lust became the forbidden bridge between heaven and earth, a portal through which celestial chaos would invade our world. We, as humanity, live with the scars of this invasion to this day. We struggle against impulses of violence, greed, and pride, often believing they are merely the fruits of our own fallen nature. But the story of the Watchers offers us a deeper and more frightening perspective. The seed of corruption that flourished so overwhelmingly in the antediluvian world was planted by celestial hands. They taught us to forge swords, to paint our faces with vanity, to decipher the secrets of the stars for selfish purposes, and to invoke spirits that should not be contacted. Human evil was accelerated, potentiated by a forbidden wisdom delivered to us as a poisoned gift. Let us imagine for a moment that world, so young and vibrant. The earth breathed a purity we would never know again. The mountains were virgin, the rivers ran with crystal clarity, and humanity, though already knowing good and evil, still lived under a sky that seemed close, accessible. The presence of God was a felt reality, and the order of creation reflected the mind of its architect. It was in this setting of primordial beauty that the dissonance began. A murmur of discontent in the heavenly choirs, a gaze held too long from the Watchers toward our plane. The beauty of God's creation, which should have inspired praise, became for them an object of possessive and transgressive desire. Their rebellion was methodical, an act of betrayal on a cosmic scale. It was not a solitary angel who fell, but a legion. 200 of the most powerful Watchers, led by a commander named Samyaza, made a solemn pact. They gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon, a peak that rose like an accusing finger against the heavens, and there they sealed their fate with a cursed oath. They committed to descend together, to take for themselves the daughters of men as wives, and to share with them all the secrets that heaven had entrusted to them. It was a conspiracy born of lust, but it quickly transformed into a full-scale insurrection against the authority of the Creator of all things. In this journey we now begin, we will unveil the veils of time to witness this story as never before. It is not just about satisfying historical curiosity, but about understanding a spiritual battle that continues to be waged. The choice of those 200 angels was a declaration that the will of the creature could override that of the Creator, and this lie is the foundation of all evil. We invite you to join us, to explore the pages of Genesis and the ancient texts of Enoch, to discover the truth about the giants who walked the earth and the judgment that followed. If you believe the spiritual world is real and that its battles affect our lives, leave your like now to strengthen our community and embark on this revelation. To understand the depth of the fall, we must first visualize the glory of the position they abandoned. We must transport ourselves to a time before our time, a newborn world still pulsing with the warmth of the creative breath. The earth was not as we know it today. Its beauty was wild, untamed and pure. The forests were cathedrals of silence and life, the rivers, arteries of crystalline water, and the air, thick with a purity our souls long for. Humanity, in its infancy, walked under a sky that seemed closer, more intimate. The separation between the visible and invisible realms was a delicate veil, and the divine order was the background melody of all existence, a harmony that would soon be broken. Our vision, however, must expand beyond our small blue planet. Imagine the cosmos as an infinite palace, designed by the mind of God, galaxies spinning like jewels on dark velvet, nebulae blooming in colors no human eye has ever seen, and stars singing in a silent chorus of light and fire. Everything operated under a perfect law, a dance of mathematical precision and poetic beauty. Each celestial body kept its orbit, each angel fulfilled its function, and each atom vibrated in obedience to its Creator. This was the great order, a visible testimony to the wisdom and power of Him who sustains all things by the word of His power. At the center of all this vastness and majesty lies the epicenter of all reality, the throne of God. We cannot describe it with our poor language, but we can feel it in our spirit. It is a source of inaccessible light, from which emanates all life, all truth, and all authority. It is surrounded by a sea of glass like crystal and revered by beings of indescribable glory. From this throne, the eternal decrees are issued, and justice flows like a mighty river. It was from this place of absolute holiness that the Watchers received their commission. They were an extension of God's own vigilance, emissaries of His order, and witnesses to His sovereignty over creation. And who were these Watchers? Forget the images of fragile, ethereal angels. They were beings of formidable power, designed for war and guardianship. Their appearance was like lightning, their garments white as snow. They carried the authority of heaven in their posture, and their eyes saw beyond the physical spectrum, perceiving the spiritual currents that shaped the world. The name Watchers or Sentinels was not a mere designation, but the very essence of their being. They were created for a single sacred task, to stand guard on the border between heaven and earth, ensuring that the order established by God was not violated. Their directive was clear and immutable: to observe. They were not to interfere, not to rule, not to reveal themselves to humanity in an intimate way. They were the silent guardians of God's garden, watching the seed of humanity grow, flourish, and multiply. They witnessed the building of the first cities, the discovery of fire, the birth of art and music. They saw innocence and complexity growing side by side in the hearts of men. Their mission was an act of cosmic patience, a ministry of presence without intervention, a testament to God's wisdom in allowing His creation to exercise its free will, even with all its risks. From their celestial perspective, human time was like a rapidly flowing river. Generations were born and died in the blink of their eternal eyes. They saw the fleeting beauty of the daughters of men, a beauty that bloomed like a flower in spring and withered in the autumn of life. This mortality, this fragility, should have served as a reminder of the Creator's wisdom and the distinction between their worlds. However, what should have inspired reverence began to generate a dangerous and strange feeling in their immortal hearts: fascination. Impartial observation began to transform into a focused desire, a lust that grew with every sunrise they witnessed over the earth. The world they inhabited was a reflection of the Creator's immutable perfection. It was a realm of light, harmony, and perpetual worship. There was no decay, no pain, no death. The very atmosphere vibrated with the holiness of God, and their existence was defined by purpose and communion with the divine. Loyalty was the air they breathed, and duty the song their spirits sang. To abandon this reality for any other would be an incomprehensible trade, a betrayal not only of God, but of their own nature. It was the choice to trade the source of all light for the ephemeral beauty of a fleeting flame, a momentary reflection in clay. In direct contrast, the earth pulsed with a completely different energy. It was a world of passion, of growth, of change, a place of chaotic beauty, where life and death danced in a continuous cycle, and at the center of this vibrant tapestry were the daughters of men. They did not possess the immortal glory of the angels, but they had something the Watchers did not know: the ability to create life within themselves, the beauty of flesh and blood, the intensity of human emotions. To celestial eyes, accustomed to the orderly perfection of heaven, this earthly beauty, fragile and passionate, became an irresistible temptation, a forbidden fruit hanging in the garden they were only supposed to watch. And it was in this contrast that the seed of rebellion found fertile ground in the hearts of 200 of their leaders. The act of seeing that Genesis describes was not a casual glance, but an intense examination, a lust that deepened until it became a deliberate decision. The duty to watch in order to protect was corrupted into the desire to possess in order to satisfy. They looked down, and instead of seeing God's precious creation, they saw an object for their own delight. This change in perspective was the first step into the abyss, the moment when loyalty to the Creator was supplanted by lust for the creature, a dark echo of the first temptation in the Garden of Eden. The transgression of a watcher was not a sin contained within itself. It was a cosmic anomaly, an act of treason with cataclysmic consequences. We can imagine it like a star that, tired of its designated orbit, decides on its own to wander through space. Such an act affects not only the star, but disturbs the gravitational balance of its entire system, generating chaos and destruction. Their decision to abandon their heavenly abode was precisely that, a crack in the dam of divine order, which was about to release a flood of spiritual chaos upon the earth, long before the first drops of rain began to fall from the skies. The stage for this profane oath would become Mount Hermon, a mountain whose peak rose majestically, touching the clouds, a natural meeting point between the terrestrial and celestial domains. This sacred place, which should have served as a reminder of God's greatness, was chosen by them as the site of their conspiracy. It was transformed into a profane altar where an oath of rebellion would be sealed with curses. The name Hermon is linked to a root meaning curse, a dark omen of what was to come. There, they would unite in their purpose, turning a symbol of ascension into a gateway for their own eternal fall. Thus, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Creation, in its primordial beauty, continued its dance, unaware of the imminent danger. In the heavens, an order of glorious guardians, created to protect, was on the verge of becoming humanity's greatest corruptors. The majesty of their position, the holiness of their mission, and the beauty of the world they watched formed a backdrop of cosmic tension. The forbidden desire blossomed in the darkness of their hearts, and the decision of 200 beings of light threatened to plunge the world into a darkness like never before seen, setting the stage for divine intervention and the purification of the waters. The Holy Scriptures, in their infinite wisdom, do not give us all the secrets of the universe explicitly. They offer us beacons of truth, divinely inspired fragments that, when connected, illuminate profound mysteries. The story of the antediluvian corruption is one such case. The Bible gives us the outline of the enigma, the skeletal structure of a shocking truth, letting the depth of its implication resonate in our spirits. It is in Genesis, the book of beginnings, that we find the first and most crucial piece of this cosmic puzzle, a short passage, yet so dense with meaning that it has intrigued theologians and the faithful for millennia. A passage that speaks of a profane union and a lineage that would mark the world forever. The canonical account begins in the 6th chapter of Genesis, with a seemingly simple statement, yet laden with monumental weight. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. This passage is the gateway to our mystery. It sets the scene of an expanding humanity, but also introduces two distinct and enigmatic groups, the sons of God and the daughters of men. The identity of these sons of God is the key that unlocks the understanding of the entire drama that unfolds next. Who were, after all, these sons of God? Throughout history, many interpretations have arisen, but the context of the Old Testament, as in the Book of Job, uses this same expression to refer to celestial beings, angels who present themselves before the Lord. Therefore, the oldest and most consistent interpretation with the worldview of the time points to an angelic incursion into our world. They were not men of pious lineages, but beings from another sphere, of a different nature than ours. They looked upon humanity, and instead of fulfilling their role as guardians, were overcome by a desire that led them to cross an impassable boundary, established by the Creator himself, to maintain the order of his creation. The biblical text is subtle but incisive. The act of seeing that the daughters of men were beautiful was not a simple aesthetic appreciation, but a valued judgment that led to the transgressive action of taking for themselves. This was not a meeting of equals, but an act of possession, a violation of the divine order. They abandoned their spiritual nature to satisfy a carnal desire, uniting what God had kept separate. This union was not blessed. It was a profanation, an illicit mixture that would generate monstrous consequences, not only for those involved, but for the entire human race, which would become a spectator and victim of the chaos that would follow this choice. And from this forbidden union, an infamous lineage was born. Genesis 6:4 tells us, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." The Hebrew word here is Nephilim, which can be translated as the fallen ones or those who cause others to fall. They were not just tall men, they were a hybrid race, beings of superhuman power, and, as tradition tells us, of a violent and oppressive nature. They were the demigods of pagan legends, the tyrants of the ancient world, whose existence was a living affront to the sanctity of God's creation. Here, the canonical record leaves us with the outline of the mystery. We have the transgression of the sons of God, the union with the daughters of men, and the birth of the Nephilim. But what about the details, the motivation, the conspiracy, the nature of the knowledge that corrupted the world? For this, Providence allowed ancient texts like the Book of Enoch to survive. Although not part of the Protestant biblical canon, it was widely known and respected in the time of Jesus and the apostles, and it offers us a window into the ancient world's understanding of this cataclysmic event, filling the narrative gaps with vivid and terrifying details. The Book of Enoch, especially in chapters 6 through 10, expands the drama in a cinematic way. It tells us that it was not an impulsive decision, but an organized conspiracy. 200 angels, belonging to the class of the Watchers, gathered under the leadership of one called Samyaza. He expressed his fear of being the only one to commit this great sin, but the others followed him, making a pact on the summit of Mount Hermon, cursing each other if any of them abandoned the plan. It was a deliberate act of rebellion, a silent declaration of war against the Most High, using humanity as their battlefield and as the prize of their transgression. And then they descended. We can imagine this scene with reverence and fear. 200 points of light detaching from their celestial orbits, abandoning their ethereal glory to clothe themselves in a form that would allow them to interact with the physical world. They did not come with divine messages, but with hearts full of lust and selfish agendas. Their arrival was not a blessing, but a curse disguised as enlightenment. They walked among men as gods, but they brought with them the secrets of darkness, secrets that humanity, in its spiritual infancy, should never have known. The knowledge they shared was the true poison. The Book of Enoch details this transfer of forbidden wisdom with frightening precision. One of the leaders, Azazel, taught men the art of war, how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. And to the women, he taught the arts of deception and vanity, the use of cosmetics, the beautifying of the eyelids, and the use of precious jewelry. He not only armed humanity for violence, but also taught superficiality and pride, corrupting both masculine strength and feminine beauty, turning them into tools of death and seduction. Other angels taught different forms of corruption. They revealed the secrets of sorcery, how to perform enchantments, the arts of astrology, and the deceptive observation of the stars. They taught men to decipher the signs of the sun and the moon for purposes of divination, diverting their gaze from the Creator to creation. In essence, they gave humanity a shortcut to power and knowledge, but a shortcut that bypassed God. It was a form of primitive Gnosticism, the promise that secret knowledge could make us gods. The same lie whispered by the serpent in the Garden of Eden, now amplified by 200 celestial voices. The immediate consequence was an explosion of violence and impiety on earth. The Book of Enoch paints a grim picture of a world consumed by chaos. Justice disappeared and oppression reigned, and the Nephilim, the giant children of this profane union, became the epicenter of this disorder. They devoured all the produce of men, and when the food was no longer enough, they turned against humanity itself, consuming their flesh. The violence escalated to the point that they began to devour one another, drinking the blood. The earth, defiled, cried out, and its cry of agony ascended to the gates of heaven. This cry of the oppressed earth is a crucial point in the narrative. God's creation was being disfigured, and humanity, which should have been its guardian, was being annihilated by the corrupt offspring of the fallen angels. The disorder was not just social, it was cosmic. The mixture of the sacred with the profane had generated monsters, and these monsters were destroying the world. It was at this point that divine intervention became not just justified, but necessary for the very survival of God's plan for humanity. The evil had reached a saturation point, and heaven could no longer remain silent in the face of such an abomination. But one might argue that this is just a story from a non-canonical book. Where is the biblical confirmation for such a specific event and such a severe judgment on these angels? The answer resonates with power in the writings of the apostles Peter and Jude in the New Testament. They, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, refer to this event not as a legend, but as a historical spiritual fact, a solemn example of God's judgment against rebellion, whether human or angelic. Their words are the canonical seal on the reality of this fall. In his second epistle, the Apostle Peter gives us an unequivocal confirmation. He writes, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, Tartarus, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment." 2 Peter 2:4. Peter uses the Greek word Tartarus, a specific term that, in Greek mythology, referred to the deepest, darkest abyss, a place of punishment for gods and titans. He is referring to a specific angelic sin, so grave that it deserved immediate punishment and imprisonment in a place of total darkness, awaiting the final judgment. Jude, the brother of James, echoes Peter's statement with even more precise details that align perfectly with the story of the Watchers. He writes, "And the angels who did not keep their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." Jude 1:6. The phrase "left their proper dwelling" is an exact description of what the Watchers did. They were not cast out like Lucifer. They voluntarily abandoned their celestial abode, their position of authority, to satisfy their desires on earth. The punishment perfectly matches the crime. For abandoning their home of light, they were confined to an abyss of darkness. The canonical scriptures, therefore, give us the outline of the mystery and the confirmation of the judgment. Genesis tells us that the sons of God took the daughters of men, generating the Nephilim. Peter and Jude confirm that angels sinned by abandoning their dwelling and are now imprisoned in darkness, awaiting judgment. The Book of Enoch serves as a historical magnifying glass, showing us the how and why behind these biblical statements. Together, they paint a consistent picture of a celestial rebellion that had devastating and irreversible consequences for the ancient world. The narrative leaves no room for doubt about the gravity of the offense. The transgression was not just lust, but the betrayal of a sacred duty, the violation of creational order, and the introduction of a knowledge that poisoned humanity. It was an act of supreme pride, the presumption that they, the creatures, could improve or redirect the Creator's plan. They tried to merge heaven and earth on their own terms, and the result was a hell on earth, a reality so corrupted that only a planetary-scale baptism of water could purify it. The theological clarity here is fundamental. The Bible confirms the existence of a spiritual hierarchy and of laws that govern both the angelic and human worlds. The fall of the Watchers serves as a terrifying example of what happens when these laws are deliberately broken. God's justice is revealed not only in his patience, but also in his decisive action. He did not allow the corruption to continue indefinitely. The immediate imprisonment of these angels shows that there are sins that provoke an immediate and severe response from heaven. This biblical exposition prepares us to understand the depth of the conflict that followed. We are not dealing with simple human failings, but with a contamination of supernatural origin. The evil that led to the flood was not just cultivated on earth, it was imported from heaven. The teachings of the fallen angels became the seed of a civilization that rose in open rebellion against God, a civilization of giants and tyrants whose violence and impiety made the judgment of the flood an inevitable act of mercy and preservation of the human lineage. Therefore, when we look at the waters of the flood, we should not see only the punishment of human sin. We should see the cleansing of a profanation that had its roots in a higher spiritual dimension. The scriptures give us all the necessary pieces: the transgression in Genesis, the details of the corruption in Enoch, and the confirmation of the imprisonment in the New Testament. Together they tell us the story of a cosmic war for the destiny of humanity, a war in which 200 guardians became the worst enemies of the creation they had sworn to watch. The heart of every cosmic drama is a choice, and the choice that confronted the Watchers was the most fundamental of all: loyalty to the Creator versus lust for the creation. This was not a conflict born on earth, but a tension that fermented in the hearts of immortal beings as they performed their millennial duty. Observation, which should have been an act of dispassionate service, slowly became a window to temptation. The beauty of the daughters of men, in their fragility and passion, acted as a mirror, reflecting to the angels not the glory of God, but the emptiness of their own orderly existence and the absence of an experience they began to desire with an overwhelming and forbidden intensity. The central tension, therefore, is lust, a lust that was twofold. It was the desire for physical form, for the carnal union that was foreign to them, but it was also a lust for relevance, for influence, for a form of self-proclaimed divinity. They no longer wanted to be just passive observers of human history. They longed to become its protagonists, its masters, its gods. This ambition transformed their ministry of guardianship into a conspiracy for domination. The divine duty, which was once their honor, began to feel like a chain, and the beauty of the earth, a promised freedom they decided they would take for themselves regardless of the cost. In this scenario of growing celestial discontent, the figure of Samyaza, their leader, emerges. He was not only the most powerful among them, but also the most articulate in his rebellion. He gave voice to the silent desire that burned in the hearts of the other 200. Samyaza represents the archetype of the fallen leader, one who, when confronted with temptation, not only yields but embraces it and transforms it into an ideology. His internal struggle, if it ever existed, was quickly supplanted by a bold resolution to defy the divine decree. He became the catalyst, the ignition point that would turn individual discontent into an organized and unified insurrection. The descent of the 200 angels, therefore, cannot be seen as a disorganized act of lust. It was a meticulously planned rebellion, a celestial mutiny. The oath made on Mount Hermon was the point of no return, a liturgical act of betrayal. There, they not only agreed to sin but cursed each other, creating a pact of collective damnation. This act transforms the narrative from a simple fall for desire into a deliberate conspiracy against the authority of God. They did not fall. They jumped, hand in hand, into the abyss, dragging with them the hope of a young world and the purity of the human race. Once on earth, the conflict manifests in a new form, heavenly wisdom, pure and sacred, is perverted and delivered as forbidden knowledge. This is the great dramatic irony. Beings created to be guardians of order become the architects of chaos. Azazel, one of their main leaders, teaches humanity to forge weapons of war. The knowledge of metallurgy, which could have been used to create tools for cultivation and progress, was immediately channeled into violence and death. The first swords were a gift from the fallen angels, and with them, humanity learned to shed the blood of its brother with terrifying efficiency. The corruption was not limited to the physical but attacked the very soul of humanity. The Watchers taught sorcery, the art of manipulating spiritual forces for selfish ends. They revealed the secrets of astrology, not as a study of God's glory in the heavens, but as a means of divination, replacing trust in divine providence with belief in a fate written in the stars. They opened portals to spiritual realms that should have remained sealed, introducing humanity to occult practices that distanced them from their creator and entangled them in alliances with dark powers. The spiritual contrast then becomes the engine of the narrative. On one side, we have God's order, a humanity growing at a natural pace, learning through obedience and communion with its creator. On the other, the disorder of the Watchers, an artificially accelerated humanity, receiving knowledge for which it was not spiritually mature. It was like giving fire to a child. The forbidden wisdom did not enlighten humanity, it set it ablaze. Violence, sorcery, vanity, and idolatry exploded across the face of the earth, not as a gradual development of human sin, but as a spiritual pandemic of celestial origin. And humanity, for the most part, became an eager student. The promise of power, knowledge, and pleasure without the need for submission to God was irresistible. Men became fearsome warriors, and women, seductresses through the arts taught to them. Society became stratified, not based on wisdom or piety, but on the power and wealth obtained through this new knowledge. Tyranny was born in this period, with the strongest and especially the Nephilim oppressing the weak. The world God had created to be a reflection of his community of love became a mirror image of the pride and rebellion of its new angelic masters. The existential conflict deepens. Humanity, which was created in the image of God, begins to reshape itself in the image of the fallen angels. Innocence was lost, not just through the knowledge of good and evil, but through the systematic practice of evil taught by superior beings. The question for every man and woman of that era became, whom shall we serve? The invisible God who sets limits, or these visible gods who offer us limitless power? The majority made their choice, and the result was a civilization that, although technologically advanced in certain aspects, was spiritually dead and morally bankrupt. The cosmic tension reaches its peak when the earth itself begins to suffer. Creation, once harmonious, groans under the weight of violence and profanation. The Book of Enoch poetically describes how the blood of the righteous, unjustly shed, cries out from the earth to the heavens. It is no longer just a human problem. The disorder has become so profound that it has unbalanced the very natural order. The Nephilim, with their insatiable appetite, devastated resources, consuming plants, animals, and finally, men themselves. The earth was being devoured from within by this monstrous race, the physical fruit of the spiritually and carnally profane union. This cry to the heavens is the dramatic turning point. The rebellion of the Watchers and the corruption of humanity were not a secret. The righteous angels, led by archangels like Michael and Gabriel, watched from their heavenly posts with growing horror. They saw God's masterpiece being vandalized. They heard the silent cry of creation and the desperate prayers of the few righteous who remained. They become the intercessors, bringing the case of the earth before the throne of the Most High. Celestial passivity ends here. The divine court is convened to judge what has become a universal crisis. The tension now shifts to God's response. Will he remain silent while his creation is annihilated? Justice, which is one of the pillars of his throne, demanded an intervention. God's patience, which is vast, had reached its limit. The conflict was no longer between the Watchers and their conscience, or between humanity and temptation. Now the conflict was direct, the disorder established by the fallen angels against the sovereign order of the Almighty God. The universe held its breath, awaiting the verdict of the judge of all the earth. The contrast between light and darkness has never been so stark. The darkness was not just the absence of light, but an active force, an organized wisdom taught by beings of light who had become agents of darkness. They promised enlightenment, but delivered a veil of darkness over the minds and hearts of men. They promised freedom, but enslaved humanity to violence and depravity. The beauty of the daughters of men, the initial trigger, now seemed a small detail compared to the spiritual catastrophe that had been unleashed on a global scale. The rebellion of the Watchers was, in its essence, an attempt to create an alternative kingdom on earth, a kingdom ruled by them based on their principles of power, knowledge, and pleasure. They established themselves as princes of this world, and humanity became their pawns. This shadow kingdom rose in direct defiance of the kingdom of God. It was a cosmic Cold War that turned hot on the terrestrial plane, with the soul of every human being as the contested territory. The final irony of the conflict lies in the fate of the Watchers themselves. In their search for a new form of existence, for a self-declared freedom, they imprisoned themselves in their own rebellion. They, who were beings of light and movement, found themselves entangled in the heavy and mortal affairs of flesh and blood. The union they so desired produced children they could not control, and who became agents of a destruction they themselves had not foreseen in its entirety. They wanted to be gods, but they became the fathers of monsters and the architects of a doomed world. Thus, the stage is set for the climax. The tension has reached a breaking point. Humanity is almost entirely corrupted. The earth is crying out for redemption. The righteous angels demand justice, and the fallen angels, along with their monstrous offspring, reign in an empire of violence. The conflict is absolute. The corruption is total, and the question hanging over creation is no longer if God will act, but how. The holiness and justice of God have been challenged, and the response that will come will not be just a punishment, but an act of purification and cosmic readjustment on a scale never before seen. The breaking point finally arrives. The cry of the earth, saturated with blood and violence, ascends to the heavens no longer as a whisper, but as a deafening shout that shakes the very foundations of the celestial throne room. God's creation, desecrated and agonizing, sends a spiritual shockwave that pierces through the dimensional veils. The blood of the innocent, devoured by the Nephilim and slaughtered by the weapons forged by Azazel, is not silent in the dust. It accuses. The holy archangels, sentinels of divine justice, can no longer bear the sight of God's masterpiece being disfigured. The time for observation is over. The moment of divine intervention, terrible and majestic, is now inevitable and imminent. Before the throne of glory, where the light is so intense it becomes solid, the four faces of divine justice present themselves. Michael, the commander of the heavenly armies; Gabriel, the messenger of the divine word; Raphael, the angel of healing; and Uriel, the light of God. They look down and see an unrecognizable world, an open wound in the cosmos. They present the case before the Ancient of Days, their voices united in a solemn accusation. They report the forbidden secrets that were revealed, the justice that was perverted, and the land that was filled with the violence of a bastard race. They do not ask for clemency for the traitors. They demand the fulfillment of cosmic law, the restoration of order. And then, the ultimate revelation is delivered in its terrifying fullness. The birth of the Nephilim was not just the creation of a race of giants, it was the manifestation of an ontological abomination. They were bodies of clay animated by a corrupted angelic power, but without a human spirit capable of redemption. They were an existential impasse, a genetic and spiritual dead end. Their strength was superhuman, their hunger insatiable, and their cruelty a reflection of their profane origin. They were the living, colossal proof that the union of what God has separated can only generate chaos. Their very existence was an insult to the sanctity of life and a threat to the line of promise. With an appetite that mirrored the lust of their fathers, the Nephilim began to devour the earth. What began with the consumption of all crops and herds quickly escalated into cannibalistic horror. They turned against humanity, hunting men, women, and children as if they were prey. The natural order was inverted. The guardians of humanity had begotten its predators. The earth, which was meant to be a home of abundance, became a macabre banquet for these voracious demigods. The corruption reached its peak. Creation was not just sinning, it was self-consuming, driven by a supernatural hunger that nothing in this world could satisfy. And from the eternal silence, the Lord of all spirits pronounces his judgment. His voice is not just thunder and fury, but also the sound of a grieving father's heart, the decree of a righteous judge who must act to save the essence of his own creation. The sentence is twofold, perfectly suited to the crimes committed, one for the celestial instigators and another for the world that became their profane playground. God decrees that disorder will not prevail. The rebellion will be crushed, and the stain will be cleansed, not with a simple reprimand, but with a purification of fire and water on a planetary scale. The holiness of heaven declares war on the corruption of earth. The judgment upon the watchers is revealed in its terrible specificity. For them, there will be no quick death. Their immortal nature becomes part of their curse. God commands his archangels to capture them and bind them beneath the hills of the earth in chains of darkness. They, who coveted the light and beauty of the physical world, would be confined in the total darkness of the abyss, and their torment would be compounded. They would be forced to watch from their prisons the annihilation of their beloved children in the waters of the flood. Only, after witnessing the destruction of all they loved, would they be sealed away to await the final judgment, the day of their eternal condemnation. To Azazel, the chief master of corruption, a particularly severe fate is reserved, because he taught men the art of bloodshed and women the art of deceptive vanity. God commands that he be taken to the desert, to a place called Dudael. There he would be bound hand and foot and cast into a pit of darkness with sharp stones piled upon him. His face would be covered so that he could never see the light again, and upon him would be imputed all the guilt for the sin he introduced into the world. His punishment was a symbol of his crime. The architect of violence and superficiality would be isolated and buried alive under the weight of his own iniquity. But what of the spirits of the Nephilim? Their gigantic bodies would be destroyed by the flood, swept from the face of the earth. However, their spirits, born of the profane union of angels and humans, would have no place in heaven nor rest in Sheol. The divine sentence decrees that they will remain on earth as evil spirits, wandering demons. Their hunger and violence would continue in a disembodied form, afflicting and tempting humanity throughout the ages until the day of the great judgment. The rebellion of the Watchers, therefore, would not end with the flood. It would leave a permanent spiritual plague, a haunting memory of their transgression. With the sentence of the angels and their offspring decreed, God turns to the world. He declares that he will open the floodgates of heaven and the fountains of the great deep. A flood of purifying waters will cover the entire earth, exterminating all breathing life, all flesh that has been corrupted. The flood is not an act of capricious anger. It is radical cosmic surgery. It is the only way to excise the cancer of genetic and spiritual corruption that had metastasized throughout all creation. It is a forced baptism for a dying planet, an act of terrible mercy to allow life to begin anew from a purified seed, Noah and his family. To deliver this message of condemnation, God chooses an unlikely messenger, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the man who walked so intimately with God that he was translated so as not to see death. It is a righteous mortal who is sent to confront the fallen immortals. Imagine the scene. Enoch, clothed with the authority of the Most High, standing before the 200 once powerful and proud. Angels now gathered in despair. He, a son of Adam, becomes the bearer of the eternal verdict for the sons of heaven. It is the ultimate reversal, the demonstration that the faithfulness of a fragile creature is more powerful than the rebellion of glorious beings. Upon hearing the sentence from Enoch's mouth, the arrogance of the Watchers disintegrates, replaced by abject terror. The weight of their eternal decision finally crushes them. They tremble and weep, not in repentance, but in dread of the approaching punishment. In a last desperate act, they implore Enoch to write a petition on their behalf, a plea for forgiveness and mercy to the Lord of heaven. They, who abandoned their dwelling to become gods on earth, now humble themselves before a man, asking for intercession, but the decree had already been sealed in the heavenly court. The door to repentance was closed forever. This is the climax of cosmic justice. God's decision is final. His sovereignty is unquestionable, and His justice is perfect and terrible. The rebellion, which seemed so powerful and seductive, is revealed as a madness that leads only to ruin and imprisonment. Order is restored through an act of uncreation to allow for a recreation. This story teaches us that no authority rises above God's, and no sin, especially the betrayal of beings so close to His glory, goes unpunished. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the deep spiritual roots of the disorder we see in the world. If you believe that God's justice always prevails, write in the comments, "The Lord is judge." It would be a tragic and dangerous mistake to believe that this story is merely a distant echo, a dusty relic from a world submerged by the waters of time. The truth is that the rebellion of the Watchers did not end with their imprisonment. It just changed its form. The same choice they faced in their celestial glory confronts us today in our earthly fragility. Their narrative is not a chronicle to be merely studied, but a mirror to examine our own souls. The same conflict between divine wisdom and forbidden knowledge continues to be the battlefield for the destiny of each one of us. The curtain of time may have fallen on that act, but the play with new actors and settings continues on display before our eyes. What is this forbidden wisdom in our days? It does not come to us through visible angels descending from a mountain, but is whispered to us in 1,000 other ways. It is the promise of power and success at any cost, encouraging us to trample on others in our climb. It is the pursuit of knowledge that inflates our ego but leaves our soul empty, a science without conscience and a technology without ethics. It is the seduction of superficial beauty, taught by Azazel, which today screams from our screens, telling us that our value lies in our appearance, not in the image of God we carry within. It is the same lie, wrapped in a new package, the promise that we can be our own gods, defining our own good and evil. Let's think about Azazel's legacy. He armed humanity for war, and today, our capacity for mutual destruction surpasses the worst nightmares of the ancient world. We celebrate violence as entertainment and call the ability to oppress power. He taught vanity, and today we live in a culture obsessed with image, where the pursuit of external perfection leads us to dangerous procedures and deep inner discontent. The jewels and cosmetics he introduced have evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives on our insecurity. We are not just using the products of his wisdom, we are worshipping at the altars he helped build, sacrificing our authenticity in exchange for the approval of a fallen world. And what about the other teachings? Sorcery, astrology, divination. Our modern era, which prides itself on its rationality, is steeped in a growing neo-paganism. People seek guidance in tarot cards, horoscopes, and New Age gurus who offer spirituality without sovereignty, power without purity, and enlightenment without the God of light. It is the same ancient attempt to bypass the Creator to gain control over creation. It is the desire to know the future without submitting to the one who holds the future in his hands. This sweet poison offered by the Watchers still flows abundantly in the veins of our society, promising autonomy, but delivering only slavery to forces we cannot control. Before us, therefore, are two paths, two sources of wisdom that cry out for our allegiance. On one side, the wisdom of the fallen angels, which is earthly, sensual, and demonic. It is marked by selfish ambition, envy, disorder, and every vile practice. It promises us freedom, but imprisons us in the cycle of our own insatiable appetites. On the other side, there is the wisdom that comes from above. It is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. This wisdom does not lead us to become gods, but to become truly human as we were created to be. The choice that defines our eternal destiny is, from which spring will we drink? The story of the Watchers is ultimately a solemn call to our own vigilance. They were named Watchers, but they failed in their primary mission, to watch over their own hearts. They allowed lust to enter, and that small seed grew into a tree of rebellion that poisoned the world. And what about us? We are called to be the watchers of our own souls, to guard the gates of our eyes, our ears, and our hearts, to question the teachings we consume, the ambitions we nurture, and the desires we allow to take root. Spiritual vigilance is not an option. It is the essential condition for survival. in a world that still echoes with the seductive whispers of those who fell. In the midst of a world of total corruption, one man stood out, Enoch. What was his secret? He did not lead armies, did not build an empire, did not write philosophical treatises. The scriptures give us a biography of sublime simplicity. Enoch walked with God. He did not seek the forbidden knowledge of the angels. He sought the daily presence of the Creator. His life is the answer for us. In an age of complexity, chaos, and overwhelming temptations, the path to transcendence and eternal life is not in climbing higher in our own power, but in walking closer, humbly, with our God. He is our refuge, our guide, and our destiny. The choice then becomes personal and inescapable. The story of the Watchers is a cosmic warning about the devastating consequences of crossing the boundaries established by God. It is proof that every attempt to seek life, power, or pleasure outside the will of the Creator ends in monstrosity and destruction. The Nephilim, those giants of renown, are the eternal symbol of this truth. They were powerful but without purpose, great but empty. A testimony that any glory that does not come from God is ultimately an aberration. Destined for judgment, which wisdom will you choose to build your life upon? The one that produces giants of momentary fame, or the one that cultivates children of God for eternity? This spiritual battle is real, and none of us needs to fight alone. Forbidden wisdom thrives in isolation, but wisdom from above flourishes in community. Therefore, we want to invite you to do something powerful right now. Let's use the comments section not for debate, but as a sacred space for intercession and encouragement. If you desire the strength to resist the temptations of this world and choose God's wisdom, ask for prayer. If you feel strong, offer a prayer for a brother or sister. Ask God, in community, for the discernment to reject all wisdom that does not come from Him and to embrace the path of life. The final invitation of this epic journey is a call to decision. The story of the fallen angels is not about them, it's about you. It's about the choice before you at this very moment. Will you follow the path of Samyaza and Azazel, a path of self-exaltation, of seeking knowledge and power that distances you from your Creator? Or will you choose the path of Enoch, a path of humble communion, of obedient trust, and of a daily walk with the God who loves you? Make no mistake, there is no neutral territory in this cosmic war. Every day, every choice, every thought is a step in one direction or the other. Know that the wisdom that comes from above is not a list of restrictive rules, but an invitation to true life in its fullness. It does not promise to make you an oppressive giant, but a beloved child, safe in the Father's arms. It does not offer the secrets to control the world, but the peace that surpasses all understanding, even in the midst of the world's chaos. The promise is not of a life without struggles, but of a life with eternal purpose, where every step is guided by the hand of the One who wove the stars and knows your name. It is the chance to trade the fleeting beauty of clay for the imperishable glory of eternity. Therefore, the decision is yours. The beauty of the daughters of men was just the trigger for a rebellion born of pride, the same pride that whispers to us that we can live without God. Reject that lie. Choose today to watch over your heart. Choose today to walk with God. Abandon the seductive promises of a world that seeks to be its own master and embrace the liberating truth of the gospel. If this message has touched your heart, if you wish to make this choice, do not let this moment pass. Take the first step, and if you are already on this journey, subscribe to our channel so that together, as a community of faithful watchers, we can continue to expose the darkness and celebrate the glorious light of God's truth.